Welcome to Whitefeather Meats. I'm Seth Perkins, one of the bearded butchers here at Whitefeather Meats. Today we're going to show you how we break down and cut up a beef. We're going to start with a half. We're going to do the front quarter. We're going to do the hind quarter. We're going to show you bone-in options, boneless options, some of the different types of cuts that you can get. But I want you to remember, through this process, this is how we would do it. So being a custom processor for over 25 years, we cut our teeth on the Butcher Boy B16 bandsaw. This is how we were taught. Come along, check it out. Let's head in the cooler and get the beef. So what we have here is an entire beef carcass, hind quarter, front quarter, and I'm gonna show you guys where to break it down, which ribs cut between, and we'll go from there. So the first thing we do is we start out by counting up 5 ribs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We make a little cut right here. And you can see that that came through this side, and that's going to separate the rib, the short ribs, the plate from the actual chuck of the animal. So then when we get this out on the processing floor, I'll show you the cut that we make here to continue with that process. And then the next thing we do is we want to break it down between the 12th and 13th rib. You can turn this around, you can count up if you want from the bottom. We've done it long enough that we can pretty much tell that's going to be our 13th rib right there. So we simply start in between the 12th and 13th, cutting all the way up, but not cutting through near that flank. And then you pull your knife down at just a little bit of an angle all the way to the vertebrae here on the back. Now what we're going to do is we're going to grab our handsaw and we're going to cut through this back bone. And when we do that and we leave that extra piece right here, that allows that front quarter to hang down, not touching the floor, but still attached to the hind quarter. And then we'll go ahead and we'll lift these up, we'll hang them on our hook, and we'll push it right out onto the processing floor. So I want to talk a little bit about the tools we're going to be using today. Let's start with our knives. 6-inch Victorinox. That's our favorite. Everybody probably knows by now. We definitely use this in all of our videos. If you want one, beardedbutchers.com. You can get one of these for yourself. It's a 6-inch, semi-stiff, our favorite knife. Also in our arsenal, we have an 8-inch and we have a 10-inch. These are both breaking knives. We will be using these for different applications throughout the process of butchering this beef, whether it be breaking down, cutting steaks, etc. You'll see those in use. We also have a polished 10-inch steel, also available on our website. This one's made by F. Dick. We have a Dexter meat hook. And then we also have a 27-inch hand saw. These are the hand tools that we'll be using. And then we'll also be using our B16 Butcher Boy bandsaw today. So let's just get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. But before we get started, I should mention people have commented in some of our other videos and asked if this is a fake beard. It is not a fake beard. It is in fact a beard net. So just want to point that out. Anyways, if you remember in the cooler, we broke this animal down between the 5th and 6th rib. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Went ahead and made a cut right there. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to bring that cut through, separating that rib section from that chuck. Keep in mind, this is an area where if you're pulling your knife towards you, chainmail, it's very important. That knife slips, bad news. So we just go ahead, make this cut right here, get our handsaw, cut through this bone, separating rib section from the chuck. Now we're going to go ahead and get it cut off and we'll get it laid down on the table. So here you have your front portion. We have brisket, foreshank, we have the arm roast, chuck roast, neck. You can do this a couple different ways. You can do bone-in chuck roast, you can do bone-in arm pot roast, you can make this boneless, you can do flat irons, you can do chuck eyes. We'll do it a couple different ways today, so follow along. The first thing we're gonna do now that we have the short rib plate portion laid up here on the saw is we're gonna go ahead and remove the skirt steak out of this simply by making a cut on the inside of that diaphragm muscle, pulling that entire section out. We will then remove the membrane off of this side and off this side, exposing that wonderful piece of meat. That's the diaphragm muscle, the skirt steak. Excellent for fajitas, tacos. Really, really nice cut. You can grill this, marinate it, cut it against the grain. One of our favorites. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and flip the bandsaw on, and we're just going to start breaking this down. We can cut this into about a 2-inch thick slice for short ribs, which to do that, typically what we do is we save the 4 bones in the center. Cutting some nice strips. Always remove the membrane on the back of these bones when we do these. Makes it a lot more pleasant to eat if you remove this membrane. Once you get it started, you can just pull it off there like that. So a real nice beef short rib. We'll get some of these cut. I'll get them all laid out on the table so you can see what we end up with. So as you can see here, I have 2 rib sections. What I did was, this is the one that I just cut off the beef. That's the harvest date, the kill date right here. This is the kill date, which is July. So this one has been aging on our shelf now for just over 6 weeks. So instead of cutting this one, I'm going to go ahead, put this one on the shelf. This one's gonna age for another 4 weeks. And we're gonna go ahead and break down the one that has been aged, and I'll show you some different options on that. Now that we have these bones removed, I can go ahead and start taking the rest of these bones off. We'll remove the ribs. We'll take this cap off there, and we'll break it down into cuts. We're going to break down this rib section. I start with peeling the membrane off these rib bones. A couple different ways you can do this rib section. You can take all these bones off. You can leave it as a roast. You can cut it into steaks. You can make those steaks bone in, which are rib steaks. You can make them boneless, which are rib eye, whichever you prefer. Today, we're going to be making rib eye steaks. So the next thing I do is remove the cap. You can start by cutting in this seam and then using a downward pressure, using your opposite hand to just pull. Following that seam, you can pull that cap right off there. Now we need to remove this yellow cord. Work that out. I like to trim it up just a little bit as a whole piece before we get started cutting our steaks. That's just less trimming that you have to do on your steaks. Now that we have all the excess bones removed, we can go ahead and take these back ribs out. Staying as close to the bone as you can, leaving as much meat on the rib section as you possibly can, because that's added value. And in this business, weight is money. So now that we have that trimmed up, we're gonna get rid of our scraps. These back ribs, these are a real nice rib. You can smoke them, you can season them, slow cook them, fall apart tender, excellent beef rib. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and just get started cutting some ribeye steaks. First thing I do is start with removing this end here that's sort of dried out from that dry aging process. That's not something we'd want to put into our trimmings or leave on a steak. We want to square our section up and then just get started cutting steaks. Normally we cut ours about 1.25 inches thick. Moving down through this section. As you can see, now that I've removed the excess bone and that discolored portion of meat, what we have left in the center is just a beautiful red ribeye steak. Typically on a rib section, you're going to see 12 to 14 steaks, and of course that all depends on how thick you cut them. Let's go ahead and start breaking down the rest of this front quarter. I'm going to remove the brisket, I'm going to remove the shank, and then I'll show you the different options that we can do with the chuck and the arm and this portion. So let's go ahead and flip this all on and get started. I want to stop and explain a little bit what I'm doing here. This is the arm portion. This is a pot roast. We're going to remove the ribs. We're going to save those for shore ribs. Now typically in like a custom cutting environment, what we would do is we would continue to cut this chuck portion. You can see the blade bone right here. We would continue slicing this all the way down to the neck, and then we would make a bone-in chuck blade roast. However, today's application and the way that we cut for our retail store, we don't sell the roasts in that style. So what I'm going to do is I'll show you how we break this down for our store. And you have to understand that our customers have a certain style they like. The demographic of where we live kind of changes what people like. It's what they're used to. This is what our customers have been buying from us for years and years. So like I said in the beginning of the video, this may not be how you see it everywhere. This is how we do it, and we're going to show you how. So here's the neck portion. Today what we're going to do is just remove the bone. You can save the bone, make some great soup stock, add it in with some crock pot with some veggies, cook it low and slow. Excellent bone for some soup. Any of the marrow bones throughout this beef, just remember the good marrows. Excellent beef stock as well. So you can slice this up. You can cook it down for that if you wish. Today we're going to go ahead and remove the meat off the bone, and it's going to go into our grindings for ground beef. We're going to go ahead and cut some soup bones. We normally cut these about 2 inches thick. This is a crosscut shank. These are excellent for braising, making soup stock, you name it. There's a nice beef soup bones. All right, on to the next cut, beef brisket. Who doesn't love a good beef brisket? Smoked low and slow, 12 hours. Take it to just over 200 degrees. This right here in a smoker's world is one of the most coveted pieces of meat in my opinion. And I'm gonna show you how to extract this out of this bone. So we've moved it off the front quarter. Now let's just go ahead and get started pulling this brisket. First of all, just removing that meat on the inside of that rib cage bone. Now we're gonna get started. There's a seam right here. You can see it between the meat and this fat. Just start by pulling on it and helping it along with your knife. I'm making very minimal cuts, and I can just push that meat right off that bone. You can see now I have this beautiful beef brisket. This is a packer style, and what I have here is the point and the flat. So that's the whole brisket. Depending on the application that you're going to be used for smoking, some charcoal style grills, you want to leave more fat on it. Some of your pellet style grills, you want to take more off. You know, you can corn this, make corned beef. It's completely up to you. Today, it's just after Labor Day here in Ohio. However, these are still a very popular cut, even though we're moving into some of the fall, the fall months here. This is just excellent. You can feed a large party, smoke it, cut it against the grains. Excellent, excellent choice if you want to do some barbecuing in your backyard. Just gonna square it up a little bit. That one, it's ready for the meat case. We're gonna go ahead and get started breaking down this chuck portion, and we're gonna extract the flat iron. We're gonna pull the blade bone out, and then we're gonna do a boneless chuck roast out of the center, which would be your chuck eye. And like I was mentioning before, this is the style we cut for our store. Our customers really, really enjoy it. So that's how we're gonna do it today. As you can see right here, starting up at the front of this shoulder blade bone, cutting through this tendon, you can take your knife and you can feel where that blade bone starts down through the shoulder, and you simply follow it all the way down, staying as close to the bone as you can until you come out to the end. And then what I like to do is make a small cut here. Using your meat hook, you can start pulling this flat iron out, keeping your knife as close to the bone as you can. Once you get that separated out, you can then pull it like this, and it leaves that bone nice and clean and extracts that top blade steak right out of that chuck portion. Very minimal boning once that's moved to the table. Nice and clean pull. Same thing on this side. This would be referred to as your mock tender. Today what we're going to do with it, we're not going to save it as a whole cut, a whole muscle. We are going to make it into some beef stew meat. Now what we're going to do is just continue to remove this shoulder blade bone. Just remember, whenever you're extracting a bone like this, you always want to stay as close to the bone as possible. Leaves more meat on your cut, less meat on the bone, higher value, more yield. Now that we have the blade bone removed, we're going to go ahead and pull this chuck eye out. Starting right here at the front of this vertebrae, you can see the chuck eye right here at this last knuckle. Take your knife, cutting all the way down along those bones. Once I get it cut all the way down to the flat bones on the back. I flip it over, extracting this chuck eye. Nice big solid piece of meat. Gonna remove the yellow cord. You can cut this portion into steaks. You can cut it into roasts. You can leave the blade bone in it. You can cut blade roasts. It's completely up to you. Like I said, in our application for our store, this is what we cut. Now, any pieces like this that you cut off make excellent stew meat. Keep that in mind. If you don't want to use it for stew meat, you put it into ground beef. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get these cut into roasts, and then we're going to net them, and we're going to pretty them up for the meat case. Makes a real nice boneless chunk of beef. You can put a net around this. You can throw it in your crock pot. You can put it in your Dutch oven. When it's done cooking, you can take the netting off of it. It falls apart. You eat the entire thing. Now on this rest of this bone left over from that chuck, I'm going to pull one section of short ribs out of here. This rib right here, super nice, meaty, short rib. Excellent for the case. Removing the membrane. Moving on to the flat iron, this top blade steak that I pulled out of that chuck. We're gonna remove the membrane and the gristle out of this piece. Just take your knife, sort of like filleting a fish, working that membrane right off the top of this muscle. Then what I like to do is flip it over. Here again, keeping your knife as close to that cap as possible, not scoring the meat. Nobody wants to buy something that's all hacked up. Make a real nice smooth cuts. You can see that's just real nice and clean. Now what we need to do is remove this piece of gristle out of the center that holds that shoulder blade on, this muscle onto the shoulder blade. You want to remove that out of the middle. So if you start right here at the top, here again, it's like filleting a fish. You can hold your blade nice and flat. You can see that strip of gristle as you slowly work that meat all the way down to the bottom, keeping your cuts to a minimal. That way you wind up with a nice smooth piece. Here again, not all hacked up. Once you get the top removed, flip it over. So what I do is I cut starting in about 1 inch or so, leaving just a little bit of that meat, and that gives you something to hang on to. Sort of like taking the sinew off of a venison backstrap. Then you just work this down like that, removing that piece right out of the center. Nice and clean, no meat on it. Now we can just square these up a little bit. This is the second most tender muscle on the beef, next to the tenderloin. If you have a chance, you're in the store, you're at a restaurant, grab yourself a flat iron. Delicious cut, and I bet you didn't know that it came from the front quarter, the chuck portion of the beef. These, when you're grilling them, when you're cooking them, they actually kind of swell up a little bit. Super tender, tons of flavor, no gristle, eat the whole thing. Moving on to those arm portion cuts. These, we cut them just over 2 inches thick. We made 3 slices. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and remove the short ribs off the bottom of these. There's one. Next, what we're going to do is go ahead and cut this into an arm roast, following the seams, just like this, squaring it up. Boneless arm roast. So typically what you do is you get one off of the first roast that's boneless. Then on this one, you're going to get 2. One's bone in, nice bone in pot roast. Got that marrow bone in there, tons of flavor. And you get a boneless one here, so we're up to 3. Removing the short ribs, just like that. We'll continue to work on those by removing the membrane off of them. Third and final piece, here again, just trimming them up, cutting one bone-in arm roast and one boneless arm roast. Now I should mention, when you're using a bandsaw, it does create bone dust on the cut. So you can get a hold of one of these, go to any butcher supply store, and we like to take this and scrape this bone dust off of here before packaging. It makes a much more presentable cut. When you put it in your crock pot, you go to cook it, you don't have to deal with all this bone dust sort of floating to the top of your pot. All around, more presentable, just a better cut of meat. Something to keep in mind. Makes them nice and clean. In our business, in our industry, it's all about what the cut looks like in the meat case. If it doesn't look good, you simply will not sell it to the customer. So in our opinion, it's a very, very important step. Little attention to detail, clean up the bone dust. This is that mock tender muscle that I pulled out of that chuck portion. Just wanted to show you how we cut some stew meat. Just some nice cubes, no gristle, about an inch by inch square. Some wonderful beef stew. Moving into the fall months here in Ohio, who doesn't love a nice pot of beef stew? We're gonna add that to our table. Now that we have the front quarter broke down into all these cuts, I'm just gonna go ahead and explain what they are. Beef ribeye steaks. This is a back rib. Skirt steaks. Beef short ribs. Beef brisket. Crosscut shank bones. Perfect for braising, making soup. This is your arm roast, boneless, bone in, beef flat irons, and boneless chuck roasts. Also, out of that mock tender, nice little pile of stew. So now that we have the front quarter all broke down into our cuts, we're gonna go ahead and move on to the hind quarter. So come along. Before we move on to the hind quarter, I wanted to show you, I know I mentioned it briefly on the front, that we net these chuck roasts, and I wanted to show you what that process looks like. So we're using a number 16 netting with our stuffing horn, and we simply pull it through the stuffing horn into the netting. We'll put this in a vacuum sealed bag. Makes a real nice cut that we can display in our case. These are excellent. for cooking. Kind of holds everything together until the very end when you're ready to pull the meat apart. You simply cut the net, everything falls apart, you eat the entire roast. Now that the front quarter has been all cut up into our various cuts, we're gonna go ahead and get started on the hind. First thing we're gonna do is remove the muscle on the outside of the flank here. That'll go into our trimmings for our ground beef. Once we get that removed, we can go ahead and remove the flank. This is your flank steak. Cutting through the membrane. I'll show you how to pull that out. You can see that it's starting to take shape. If you take your knife and cut right along this seam and then just start pulling that flank steak out, using your knife here again, just to help when needed, you can pull this entire flank out just by following that seam right down through there. Like that. Beef flank steak. Trim it up a little bit, removing some of this outside fat. Moving this tail portion. A couple different things that you can do with this. You can marinate it, grill it. When you're done, finished grilling, cut it against a grain. Something that we like to do is we actually like to hold this down on the table using your knife and butterfly this open. So we like to butterfly it, open it up, fill it with feta cheese, onions, and peppers, a little bit of Bearded Butcher Blend seasoning on there, throw it on the big green egg, the Traeger, pellet grill, charcoal, whatever you want to do. If you want to get a hold of some seasonings, visit the link in the description. You're going to love it. Beef flank steak. Removing this knuckle, which consists of the round tip, i.e. sirloin tip, tri-tip, those are all located right here. I went ahead and switched to my 10-inch breaking knife. Just start by cutting right there through that knuckle using your meat hook. Cut down both sides. Once you get that knuckle exposed, you follow the femur bone until it gets to the right there at the bottom, and then you simply pull that whole chunk out like that. Removing the knuckle off the end, starting here at the top, finding the seam. You can just pull that muscle right out of that portion. Now what we're going to do is cut this into some roasts. You can cut it into steaks, whatever you'd like. This is a round tip roast, also called a sirloin tip roast, depending on where you're shopping. Now we're going to go ahead and remove this tri-tip. For the guys that are, and ladies that are out there smoking it up on their barbecue grill over the weekend, highly recommend grabbing a beef tri-tip. It's a fairly inexpensive cut, so it's pretty affordable. Very, very desirable, tasty cut of meat. We typically remove most of the fat off of ours. We found that during the smoking process, it just gives you a real nice finished product in the end. Very little work needs to be done to it once you have smoked it. You can put that right on the grill once it's reached its desired temp, slice it against the grain, you've got a beef tri-tip. Moving on, we're gonna go ahead and remove the suet out of this hind quarter. This is where you have to be really, really careful. Located right behind this suet is the beef tenderloin, and we don't want to get into that with our knife. So you just have to be real careful working this fat out, finding that seam, downward pressure. You can pull this beef suet out, exposing that beef tenderloin right there. With the beef suet, we typically pull the kidney out. That goes into pet food. The suet, you can chunk that up. Birds, you can make soap, whatever you wish. Nice big chunk of beef tallow. Now we want to move the sirloin, short loin from the round portion. So finding this ball joint right here, you want to start maybe about a knife width below that and just make a cut right here. Find the base of where the tail was, pull it towards you, cutting about an inch below the base of where the tail was. You're not going to be able to cut all the way through because there's bone there, but you want to get that seam started. Then you grab your handsaw, cutting through this ball joint. Removing that sirloin and the short loin. So today we're going to show you how to do a boneless portion of this loin, which consists of beef fillet or tenderloin, sirloin, and strip steaks. So fillet, sirloin, strip, that's the boneless style. And then we're also going to show you on another half how to do the bone-in version, which is the sirloin, porterhouse, and T-bone. We're going to show you the two options. These are some of the cuts that confuse people the most, so we're going to explain it to you and hopefully clear things up a little bit. So removing this beef tenderloin. This is a cut that you definitely want to be careful with. Take your time. You don't want to leave any of the meat on the bone on this one for sure. So staying right up along the vertebrae here. Use the tip of your knife. You can see I'm using my wrist, and I move my wrist back and forth, following that bone. Once you get to the end, start cutting down, continuing all the way back up to the sirloin, removing that whole tenderloin. Just like that. Now what we want to do is break the sirloin off of here. So right here at the last knuckle on this vertebrae is where you want to make your cut. Use your table and your force, downward force to your advantage. You can see that sirloin pretty much just pops right off there if I put it up on the edge of the table. Using that downward pressure, you can pull that sirloin right out of there. Tenderloin, sirloin, strip loin. Now we're just going to break each one down and clean them up. We're going to remove the bone. Making a boneless sirloin. You can leave the bone in it, make a pin bone sirloin. And just remember, any of these trimmings that we're taking off of these cuts, we're going to be cutting kebabs, we're going to be cutting stew meat, stir fry, that sort of thing. So just because you see us removing something off there, it's not necessarily going to lose value by going into ground beef, because we're going to cut a value-added item like the ones I just mentioned. Moving on, Let's tackle that tenderloin. Start by removing this tissue. A little bit of fat on the bottom. That all removed all the way down to the tail. Once you get the fat and membrane off the top, you want to use the very tip of your knife and start it underneath this silver skin, following it out to the end like that. And then you can just slowly work this silver skin off without hacking into the cut. Nobody wants to spend a high price for a beef fillet and get one that's all hacked into a bunch of pieces. So just take your time removing all this silver skin. What you end up with is a beautiful cut like that. Now on this strip loin, we'll want to chine these bones and remove any excess. You can see I made one pass down through these bones with that saw, leaving very minimal meat. We'll go down through there and get that cleaned out. But now that we have those bones removed, I'll show you how we finish out this strip loin. So we want to move down through the top, making this boneless. Removing all the rest of these pieces of bone. Here again, staying as close to the bone as you can, leaving the meat on the cut, not on the bone. Square it up a little bit. If you need to do any trimming, if the beef's real fat, back fat or anything like that, this is where you're going to want to do it. That way, if you trim the whole muscle, you don't have to go back through necessarily and trim each individual steak. So, and then you remove these rest of these little vertebrae pieces out of here using just the tip of your knife. You can see I'm using my thumb, put a little bit of pressure on that bone to hold it in place as I cut around it. Like this. If you try to do that without holding on to it, everything's just kind of wiggle around. It's a lot more stable when you put your thumb on it, keep it in place. Now all the bones have been removed. We have strip loin, tenderloin, sirloin. We're going to break them down, cut them into some steaks. So for the strip and the sirloin, I'm going to go ahead and move to my 10-inch breaking knife. Start with squaring it up just a little bit. Cutting these steaks about 1.25 inches. You want to make sure that when you cut these, you cut them real even. You want a nice even steak. You don't want it tapered, thick on one end, thin on the other, because then when you cook it, it's not going to cook evenly. So you definitely want to kind of get the hang. You can see I'm actually using all 5 of my fingers on my left hand to stabilize this cut as I'm cutting through it. Something to keep in mind. Strip steaks, New York style strip, depending on where you're located across the country, they might be called different things. There's the strip portion. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the sirloin. It's boneless sirloin steaks for our meat case. Sometimes we'll leave them as a whole steak, and then other times we'll cut them in half. Gives people the option of what size they would like. There's your 2 options. There again, cutting a real nice even steak. That way they cook evenly. Moving on to the beef tenderloin. You can leave this whole, you can roast it, you can roll it, tie it. Today, we're simply gonna cut it up into steaks for our store. We like to cut these quite a bit thicker, about 1.5 inches. Cut a real nice 10 to 12 ounce beef filet. You can see just really nice trimmed, even cut, excellent, excellent steak. So there you have it. Beef sirloin, strip steak, and beef filet. Now just remember, that's the bone-in style on that loin. Next, I'll show you the bone-in. So I showed you guys the boneless portions of these primal cuts, which were the ribeye steaks, the tenderloin or filet, the sirloin, and the strip steaks. So now what we're gonna do with the rib portion, I left the bones a little bit longer on this one. I'm gonna show you how to make a tomahawk chop. And then on the sirloin and the short loin over here, we're gonna do sirloin steak, porterhouse, and T-bone. So I wanted to show you the difference between the boneless and the bone-in. So in order to get started breaking these tomahawk chops down, you need to remove that top of that vertebrae right there, exposing that thin line of meat so that we can peel the bones off and then separate and clean the rib bones on this. So I'll show you how we do that. So we can start by removing the membrane here again, the back of these ribs. This one can be a little bit more challenging to take off. Just use your hook, working it off there, like that. Once you get the membrane removed, we're going to start by removing the bones on the back, just like we did for the ribeye. We do for this. As you can see, we made that cut on the top of here with our bandsaw so that we can peel these bones off, otherwise you wouldn't be able to get them off there. So after you get your bones removed, you flip your rib section over, and you can see where that ribeye is right here. You want to start about 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches above that ribeye, cutting right through that shoulder blade. And then you want to size it up on this end, and you want to end up about 1 inch past the eye on this side. So you just make a imaginary line through there with your eyeball, and then you cut it with your knife. You can see where I ended up. You want to remove this meat off the top of these rib bones, keeping your knife flat against the bone, just like that. Now we'll go ahead and remove the cap. Starting right here, there's a seam. You just want to take your knife and follow that seam out. If you're going to be doing a roast or something like that, you can leave this fat cap on here if you'd like, but the way we display them in our case, we like to have it removed. Go ahead and remove the yellow cord. Knocking a little of the excess fat off. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to start down in between each of these bones, cleaning the meat off of them. You want to try to get the bones as clean as you can. Any meat that's left on there can sort of turn a little bit gray during the cooking process. It's just a nicer look for your case. You can also take a piece of butcher's string and tie it around the bottom and kind of rip this membrane off these bones. Today, for sake of time, I'm just going to go down through, give you a brief idea of what we do, and then we'll show you the end result of what the tomahawk looks like when we're done. So after I get all the meat removed between the bones, I can finish up by just taking my knife and sort of scraping some of that meat that's left and membrane off the top of these ribs, and just continue to get them cleaned up. After you're satisfied with how much you've cleaned on the bone, you can then go ahead and start cutting these. I might spend a little bit more time on these once we're done, just to clean them up a little bit, but for the sake of video, we're going to go ahead and get started cutting these into some steaks. All right, so now we get our 10-inch breaking knife and we square the ends of this up just a little bit, and then we just start cutting down through these bones. Getting all the way to the end and then squaring this one up as well. What you're left with is a real nice beef tomahawk rib chop. Like I said, we'll spend a little more time cleaning these bones up and getting them all nice and white for the case. But there you have it. And I'm going to show you a little trick that you can do also. So some of these are going to weigh like 2.5 pounds. That's a pretty healthy steak. I know for the carnivores out there, who wouldn't love a big thick steak like this, but sometimes, you know, depending on who you're cooking for, they're simply just a little bit too big. So if you move over here, I'm going to show you what you can do with these. So if we move over to our bandsaw, we've found that if you cut them in half, it makes a real desirable cut. So now you can see what you have is something that is about half the thickness. You're still, you know, over 1 inch thick, and it still has a long bone on it. Just a little bit more manageable size. It's completely up to you whether you want to do a nice big thick one, which is the entire bone, or you want to cut that in half and do 2 steaks per chunk. So now we have the sirloin, the beef short loin, and we're going to continue showing you how to do the bone-in version. A couple different ways you can do this. You can start cutting this whole entire section. You can square this off. You can cut this into bone-in, like a pin bone sirloin, setting the depth on your saw, maybe cutting those 1 inch thick or so. Or what we like to do is we knock this entire sirloin off of here, and then we make a boneless chunk of tenderloin, cut it into fillets, and then we make boneless tenderloins. So we don't put a bone-in sirloin in our, we do a boneless sirloin. We don't put bone-in sirloins in our meat case. We make them all boneless. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do today. And then we will continue to cut this into porterhouse and T-bone. Okay, so that's the bone-in version. Porterhouse, nice stack of those. T-bones, tomahawk chops. And just remember that if I was to remove the piece of filet out of these, take the bone out, you then have filet and strip. So I wanted to show you guys the difference between bone-in and boneless. Now keep in mind, I did use a hind quarter off a second half, so this is not possible out of one entire half. So you really have to, you can do a portion of each. It's just a little bit harder on your meat cutter, takes a little bit more time, but it's recommended you pick a half of beef. You know, let's say you're gonna go to the butcher and you're gonna order one for your freezer at home. Choose bone-in or boneless. Just remember with the boneless, you get ribeye, sirloin, filet, and strip. With the bone-in, you get rib steak, sirloin, rib steaks, maybe I already said that, porterhouse and T-bone. So those are the two different options. I'm going to continue to break down this sirloin, making it boneless since that's the way we display it in our case. And we'll go from there. Now on to the round portion. Let's get this down on the table and we'll start breaking it down. We're going to start by cutting through this Achilles tendon, removing this hind shank, following this seam, and cutting through this knuckle right here at the top of this shank. Just like that. Once you get the shank removed, you're going to remove this little oyster steak. Not a lot of meat there. If you want to save it, you certainly can. After you get that removed, we're going to go ahead and remove the H-bone, starting up here at this ball joint. And a lot of this for me is muscle memory, so I know which angle to put my knife or make my knife go to cut this out of here. Just follow that bone down, removing that H-bone right out of there. So after you get the H-bone out, you want to remove this femur. Starting up here at this end where the ball joint is. Here again, this is one of those places where you want to be real careful with your knife, because if you slip, this is where you could stick yourself and things could go bad in a hurry. So highly recommend wearing chainmail. Working your way around the femur, using some upward pressure to pull that entire bone right out of that round. We can separate this round into three muscles. It consists of the top round, the eye, and the bottom round. First of all, we're going to go ahead and remove this heel just by following the seam. We don't typically save this heel for anything other than ground beef. Removing the top round, and you can tell I'm barely putting any pressure on this at all, and just let my knife do the work following that seam. So we have top round. Next is the eye of round. And then we have the bottom round. Continue removing the fat, the cap, the gristle, all of these off each individual piece of muscle. So the bottom round makes a real nice piece if you're going to be cutting jerky, cube steak, anything like that. You can cut it into roasts. Real nice bottom round. When we do the eye, if you cut this into roast, you're going to want to leave a little bit of this fat cover, this cap on it. We don't want to remove it all. Squaring it up. Typically what we do is we cut it in half. Nice 2 to 3 pound roast. Let me get rid of some of my scraps and I'll be back for the top round. Now on to the top round. We're going to go ahead and take the fat off of it. There's a little artery that runs through here. We like to get that out of there. Usually what we're doing with the top round is cutting it into like a London broil or cube steaks, but most of the time we're going to cut it into strips for jerky. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how we're going to do that today, since that's what we're going to be using this for. Removing this cap. Just like that. Once you get the cap removed, you can switch over to your 8 or your 10-inch breaking knife, cutting against the grain. Cut this into the thickness of that you want your jerky. So normally we cut ours about 1.25 inches thick. So just cut it like this. Once you get it cut into strips, we can then take a slice, cutting it against the grain, making strips for jerky. See, the grains are running this way. You don't want to cut it with the grain, because then when you go to eat it, it's a lot harder to chew. And the same application applies to whatever species you're working on, whether it be bison, elk, venison. All of the top rounds are essentially pretty close to the same muscle, same strands throughout, so you can cut it the same way. The round's all done. We have a bottom round, eye round, top round for jerky. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take this bottom round and cut into jerky as well. So I'll just cut it into strips, and then we'll continue slicing that up, and it'll look just like this. We'll add it to the pile, we'll get it seasoned, we'll get it into the smoker, and we'll have beef jerky. Beef hind shank, we're going to do the same thing we did as with the front shank. We're just going to get it sliced up for soup bones. We'll add this to our pile, and we'll do an overall shot of, and I'll explain everything that we did on the front and hind combined.
So about 50% of what comes off of the beef carcass is going to be the stuff that you're going to debone, and we make it in the trimmings, at least 50% for us. So whenever you're working through this, it's really an advantage if you have somebody actually doing the breaking of the carcass and getting your cuts. And then what we have here is we have several different workstations. We'll work around this table, and we can break it apart. So whenever you're going through this, you just want to obviously remove the muscle. And what we like to do is every cut's different. You learn by muscle memory, but you want to stay close to the bone. And what we'll do a lot of times is we'll take the muscle close to the bone and the cartilage with it. And whenever we get done with the removal from the bone, we can, if we have to, further trim the bone, and then we can then take the boneless portion and remove any excess gristle or fat out of it, and then it goes into our trimmings lug. So what you want to look for is just obviously the bones coming out of it, excess fat, and then any connective tissues or cartilage. What you'll do is spend a majority of your time picking through things, and depending on the size of your grinder, you have to make it appropriate size. You'll notice in our other video with the trimmings video that we have, as well as whenever we do a breakdown of like a deer carcass, if we have a different grinder, we have to make it in a smaller size. In this case, with the commercial grinders, we can make them just about the size of your fist. So spend some time going through your trimming carefully, and that's we're gonna make up a big portion of your yield off of your beef's carcass. So now that we're done with the trimming, everything here is 100% boneless, remove the excess fat in the gristle, and we're left with 140 to 150 pounds from our half of beef. So what we'll do is, just like our grinding videos with our smaller version of the grinder, where we change from a coarse plate to a fine plate, this is a Gemini system where this large Butcher Boy A52 grinder will push into a smaller mixer tumbler. This has a coarse plate in it of 3/8 of an inch that goes into the tumbler, and it's gonna tumble and then grind out again another 1/8 of an inch. So we're just able to do on a large scale what we can do with our smaller grinder that you've seen in our other videos. So this will go through our grinders, and then we'll either make the beef patties or the bulk ground beef out of it.
So let's just do an overview on what we did. We cut the entire half. We did the front portion first. That's where all these cuts came from. And then we did the hind portion, and then we did the bone-in steaks. So let's just do an overview here, and I'll explain what we did. Beef short ribs, beef ribeye steaks, some cross-cut suet bones, skirt steak, some beef back ribs, arm roast, boneless and bone-in, beef brisket, chuck roast. We went ahead and netted those, flat irons, a little bit of stew meat. Now switching to the hind quarter. Beef tri-tip, flank steak, round tip roast, eye of round, beef sirloin steaks, fillets, tenderloin, beef strip steaks, that's a New York strip, beef jerky. So that's everything that we did cut-wise on the first half. And then we also showed you the bone-in version on the second hind quarter that I cut, which is a porterhouse, T-bone, and tomahawk chop. If you pan over here, these guys are finishing up the trimmings. As you can see, this will be our grindings for hamburger. They're cutting more stew meat. We have some stir fry. We have marrow bones for soup. So we appreciate you guys coming out today. We wanted to do a beef video. This is how we do it here at Whitefeather Meats. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe because there's a lot more to come.